The purpose of this tutorial is to showcase some of the things that are in Mathify's image bank, and it's been revised as of January 2022. So I want to show you a little bit about, well, some of this, what was already in there, and some of the new things too. So let's upload image, and so this is the new one. Now I'm gonna just briefly go through each of the folders. So this is a lot of grade 10 stuff, and for example, this shows what a perpendicular bisector looks like. It's a good idea for tutors to go through this before they tutor, and so you're aware what's in here. So let's go back. So that's the analytic geometry one. If you want to talk about functions on a calculator, for example, these are all pretty normal calculators you'd spend, 10 or 15 to 30 or 40 bucks for. So if you want to talk about, particular functions in a calculator, like for example, the pi key or the x squared, the squaring key, that's a very good way to get a visual of what those things look like. These are a whole bunch of equations, mostly from, well, they're all high school. So you don't have to write out, for example, yeah, let's do the factored form one. That there's an image, so you can just upload what it looks like. Now, these are a whole bunch of formulas, and so, for example, if you were talking about circumference, here's a nice little example showing, okay, that's pi, the radius is 3. So there are some nice things in here, and of course that doesn't just apply to high school. That's the kind of thing you do in some of the elementary courses as well. Now, for example, here's a nice little Pythagorean theorem illustration. So for the 3, 4, 5 triangle. So if a student was asking you, well, can you explain to me how or why Pythagorean theorem work? It's really one interpretation is the area of the squares in the two legs adds to the or sums to the area of the square on the hypotenuse. So that's a good illustration of that. Now, I'll talk about this folder for a moment. For those teaching grade 9, these are all the formula images from the formula sheet. So if especially EQAO time, if a student comes and asks you a question, then you can upload one of these and it's exactly the same as what's on the formula sheet the student's probably using, okay? As opposed to creating a new formula that might be a little bit different. Let's go back here. In the elementary grades, if you are doing something with fraction strips, especially if a student asks you, how would I use fraction strips in this particular question, we have some fraction strips here too. I'll talk about grade 11 at the end. So grids. There are grids here now. That's a nice little grid for graphing. Now the problem with grids is that if you're writing on an image, sometimes the writing can get behind the image, so it's not a great idea to use them sometimes. But actually, I do want to show you. Actually, let's leave that one up. There we go. I want to have something in the. Let's use that one here. These two grids here are that one and the one beside it are transparent. So notice that you can see through it what's in behind. So for example, if I wrote something here, and I'm going to upload the grid beside it here. This one's not numbered. It's otherwise the same thing as the one I just uploaded. You see that you can still see the 2x because this is a transparent grid. So they can be really nice to use because you can write on them and not worry about stuff getting hidden behind if you're doing a little bit of graphing. So here's some images about linear relations. So for example, this is variation talks about you can use this to illustrate the differences between direct and partial variation that's talked about in some of the grade 9 or 10 courses. And also, if you're doing graphing and talking about independent dependent variables, then there's the axis labeled like that. So okay, let's take a look at. Now, these are some images I made up for a tour of Mathify if you get a brand new student. So, for example, this one talks about all the tools on the toolbar and what they all represent. So it's a nice little graphic in case somebody's not sure of what one of those symbols means. A lot of them are pretty universal. For example, like the save icon. Just about everybody knows what that looks like, but it's there anyway. Messages, for example, there's a couple different nice little messages here. A welcome. Now, if you're proposing a student does one-way audio, you can upload this and use it as a visual cue of what the student should be doing. So it says click on the microphone icon that'll be up there somewhere beside end session. Okay, to give the pop-up box of options, the browser audio, phone audio, or no audio. You pick one of the first, student picks one of the first two, and then they, after they hear you say hello or something like that, they can mute their device, not of course by clicking on that, and then they can use the chat. The tutor can use the audio. Hence, we have one-way audio going on. So that's a nice little message for that. Now, in this miscellaneous category, these are a whole bunch of images that, again, if you're talking about fractions or rational numbers, it's shows what the numerator, denominator is, what's on the bottom. I'm not the greatest typer, so I made up this, and I'll drag it over in a second when this opens up. And I was talking too much. Wasn't thinking that wasn't an image. Okay, this is a notepad document. So here's a whole bunch of like area formulas, perimeter formulas you can use. If you want to copy and paste it into a text box instead of writing the whole thing, some formulas can get fairly lengthy. So and for example, these formulas that have pi, it's actual the pi symbol. Okay, so if you want to copy them, I keep that kind of thing open when I'm tutoring so I can copy and paste them into the chat or a text box, and it's really kind of handy because I don't type particularly fast. Okay, so you can't, that's not an image there. Okay, plane geometry. So there's some nice visual references to things like angle relationships, for example. Okay, complementary angles, supplementary angles, example. So be aware of what's in there. They can be very useful at times. There's a couple things about probability if you're talking about a tree diagram, for example. Okay, there's an example of a tree diagram throwing a die and a coin. Quadri. So this is more the high school, of course. Some good visuals here. This one has a lot on it. If you're teaching the grade 10 academic course or some of the grade 11s too, and of course, using parts of this might be beneficial as well. This talks about a lot of the properties of quadratic relations and the three different forms and how you move from one to the other by either expanding or factoring or completing the square. So a lot of that could be very useful students talking about something something specific, of course. This is the completing the square steps. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Shapes. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different shapes here. And this here, these are all transparent curves. And actually, I'm going to, again, let's see now. So let's say, actually, I'm going to pause for a moment here. Okay, so I just wanted to draw a graph here, and you didn't need to wait for me to do that. So let's say you were graphing a sinusoidal function. So this would be something you might do in grade 11. So here's these images. So if you go into shapes and the transparent curves. So let's say it was a sine curve that you're graphing. And remember down here in the shapes, of course, there is no sine curve. There's a parabola, lines, but there's no parabola, sine curve, sorry. So let's say it had a period of 270 degrees. And let's make the a little smaller here. Maybe it's got an amplitude of 3. That's getting pretty close. Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty close, maybe tiny bit too much, but no, drag it down a bit. Oh yes, 3 there. Yeah, that's pretty close there. So you can use these to model sinusoidal functions. There's also a cosine curve too, and they're all transparent too. Maybe you want a reflected cosine curve. Of course you can drag it to whatever size you want it, just like the parabola uh, shape here. So there's all those, and actually I'm going to pause it again here. So I drew another graph here, and I want to talk about the parabola shape. So let's say, so those are the 5 basic dots for y equals x squared. Again, this is high school, so let's say I had my graph. So there's some limitations to this parabola shape because whoever created it didn't do a particularly good job. Okay, yeah. Okay, so on the right here, I've got to go in through those 3 points, but you see it's not completely perfectly symmetrical. See, I'm a fair bit off of these. So I'm going to upload my parabola shape. Here's my parabola. Okay, and if I try to fit this on the graph, then you can see that I can actually get it going through all of the points. So it is better. Actually, see how it's the Mathify one over here. It's covered because that side is good. It's the problem is the right side here. It's off a bit. Okay, so and there's other curves too. For example, there's the exponential one, the square root one, and they're all transparent curves too. Okay, so that's another something that you might find useful. Some transformations images. So, for example, if a student was talking about rotations, there's a good example of what that kind of thing looks like. Actually, let's just clear the whiteboard. And there's a bunch of trigonometry stuff. For example, if you have a student who isn't aware of what angles of elevation depression are, there's a pretty good graphic to instead of you drawing something yourself. Okay, I said I was going to go back and talk about the grade 11 one. That's what I'm going to finish with here. Now, we have 4 new courses in grade 11. That's a pilot for the whole year this year. And the 3U, the 3E, that you 3U, 3E you see right here. I'll talk about that one first, maybe. There's not a lot in here. There's some coin images, some financial stuff, financial formulas, and a little bit on taxation showing what a T4 looks like, provincial and federal sales taxes. Now, there's the 3U course, and most of these other folders are stuff for the 3U course. There is not a separate folder for the 3M because the 3U and 3M have a fair bit in common, but also a lot of what's in the 3M is also in the 2D course. So a lot of the other quadratic stuff that you see in other folders go there. We don't need to put the same thing in other folders. And the 3C as well. A lot of that you'll find in other courses. So there's other folders that contain these. So um, there's some functions images here, for example. Some nice graphics that instead of drawing your own, this one shows when you have no points of intersection between a line and a curve, 1 point and 2 points. So instead of you drawing your own, be aware that it's there. And so that's just about it. Again, there's quite a bit here for the grade 11 course, so have a look through. There's some of the exponent laws instead of you writing them out. So, and that's my whole point of this video is to showcase a bit of what's in the image bank, but take a look yourself and consider the courses that you tutor. Look for the things that you can use in your tutor sessions because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And that's the end of the tutorial.